Hello, my name is Lo, and I am currently in thought. For the last few months, I have been traveling around the world, partially so that I can see the world, and partially so that I can take some time to reflect on who I am and what I want to do with the rest of my life. The first reflective video that I made, which I'm hoping will be the start of a series, was called Am I Creative?, in which I talk about my past with creativity and how I have worked to change my own thinking and view myself as a creative person. In that video, I referenced a lot of my friends' responses from when I asked for input about creativity through my Instagram stories, but there was one response that I didn't touch on, because that response brought up an entirely different question. Instead of asking whether or not an individual is or is not creative, it was asking whether or not a society allows or does not allow a person to be creative. And I think that topic deserves its own video. So in this addendum, I'm going to be talking about social factors that can influence a person's creativity, how social factors have influenced my creativity in the past, and how our current situation, coronavirus, affects creativity on a society-wide level. And even though my friend's response does specifically mention Marx, I'm going to try to steer clear of political theory in this video, both because it can be divisive and honestly boring, and because I just want to focus on my own reflections, my own experiences as much as possible. One basic theory that I do want to bring up, though, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I'm sure most people have seen or heard of this by now, but as a quick refresher, it essentially categorizes human needs into basic, psychological, and self-fulfillment, and organizes them into a pyramid. At the bottom you have things like food, water, shelter, and at the top you have things like altruism, creativity, fulfilling your life's purpose, whatever that means. Many elements of the theory have been criticized in academia, but it is still useful as a way to conceptualize people's general tendencies and motivations in daily life. For example, it may be more difficult to develop healthy self-esteem if you don't have a supportive family or friend group. And when you don't have access to food and water, it can be pretty difficult to focus on anything else. There's a romantic trope of a starving artist who may not have any friends or savings or even a house to live in, but by God, they must fulfill their artistic destiny. But Maslow's hierarchy shows us that it's not pain and suffering that facilitate art, it's health and stability. But so far, all of this is just theory, so how does it compare to real life? Well, in my case at least, it maps out pretty well to my experiences. I uploaded my first video to this YouTube channel in May of 2019 when I graduated from college. I was in debt. Luckily, I didn't have any student debt, but I did have credit card debt, and I started having to pay rent. So I started working at 2 different cafes, usually a total of about 35 to 40 hours per week, in addition to doing paid psych studies, extra gigs, and other random odd jobs that I could find. And as a side note, I know that doesn't sound like a lot because 40 hours per week is the standard for full-time work, but bear in mind that this is food service work. I was always on my feet, whether making coffees or cleaning or restocking or whatever else, and I was working at 2 different places, so sometimes I would have to run from a morning shift at one cafe to an evening shift at the other, and I literally wouldn't get a break for 11 straight hours, not to mention the fact that I walked 15 minutes to and from work every day. Plus, anyone who has ever worked in food service knows that it's emotionally exhausting as well. Just a single rude customer can entirely ruin your day. So all that is to say, I was pretty much always tired. I was able to pay off my debt and even save up some money for this trip, but it took a lot out of me. I remember being so excited moving into this first house after college because all of my roommates were creative people, and I thought that being in that kind of environment would encourage me to be more creative myself. And at several points while I worked there, I tried to set up art nights, weekly writing sessions, etc., with my housemates, but by the time it came to actually do it, I was always just too tired. Essentially, I was having to choose to spend my time doing either paid work or art. And even though some people are able to monetize their art through online shops, sponsorships, crowdfunding, freelance work, I just wasn't at the level of skill or experience necessary to be able to live off of my art. And even if I did have enough skill, starting a creative career takes a lot of time and energy and is very risky. So if you don't have enough money to fall back on, it's not really a viable option. And of course, I had to prioritize the ability to eat over the ability to make YouTube videos. And I didn't make another YouTube video until November. And I'm not saying this as a way to avoid taking responsibility for my lack of initiative. In fact, I'm making this video because I think in Am I Creative, I took too much responsibility and overlooked the fact that during this period, my material conditions just really didn't allow me to be creative. But now, the world has shut down, and I, like a lot of people, find myself with a lot of free time. And because of that, I am finally uploading somewhat regularly to this channel. I see my friends also throwing themselves into creative projects that they had been putting off until when I have time. And now that almost everyone is bored and stuck inside, even people who haven't done anything creative in years are finally able to dedicate themselves to those passion projects. I mean, how many people have you heard talking about writing a novel or starting a podcast? But there are also a lot of creative people who aren't going through their personal renaissance right now. So what's the reason for that? Well, I'm not sure if anyone has been made aware of this, but we are currently living in unprecedented times, and it is stressful to be living through a pandemic. With this virus having such a long incubation period and the potential for asymptomatic transmission, pretty much anyone could be a threat to pretty much anyone else's safety. And as our dear friend Maslow reminds us, safety is a pretty basic need. Beyond being stressed out about health, a lot of people are also stressed out about money. Right now, the most recent data I can find says that almost 39 million people in the United States have filed for unemployment since mid-March. And while United States stimulus packages have theoretically given a one-time $1,200 check to every adult and increased unemployment by $600 per week, there are a lot of people who have been severely impacted by coronavirus but have slipped through the cracks of these relief efforts, either because their parents claim them as a dependent or because they work in an essential industry but they are choosing not to go back to work because of the safety risk, or a number of other reasons. Beyond just the United States, a number of other so-called advanced economies are expected to enter recession this year, and about 40 to 60 million people globally are expected to enter extreme poverty. People working in tourism and hospitality have been particularly hard hit, as have small business owners and workers. And because of all of this, a lot of people around the world are now struggling to pay rent, which means that their basic need of shelter and security is at risk. As a side note, if you are interested in learning about the structures that led to the current rent crisis and how they might unfold in the future, I highly recommend watching the episode of the Patriot Act about rent, which I will link below. So yeah, even though people might have more time right now, their material conditions might still prevent them from being creative. People are still having to prioritize physical needs over creative needs, buying groceries over buying paintbrushes. The classic artist dilemma is to either do the passionate creative work that you want to do and struggle to put food on the table, or to do the work that the man wants you to do and fill your belly but not your soul. But now a lot of people don't even have the option to do the spiritually unfulfilling but well-paying work. So people end up having to choose between one, either trying to find a new way of making money, probably unsuccessfully, or two, joblessness, or two, accepting their joblessness and just making art. I guess you can tell which option I'm going with. And yeah, even though I am currently once again racking up credit card debt, I'm still incredibly privileged to be able to make that decision. I'm assuming that I'm gonna be able to get a job once everything calms down. I'm assuming that I'm going to be able to work off this debt in a few exhausted months like I did last summer. And I'm assuming that even if things don't get better soon, I'm still gonna have enough safety nets to be able to survive. So yeah, as much as some people would like to think of this pandemic as the great equalizer, it does in fact affect people disproportionately. Some people are able to spend their newfound free time making art, while others have to figure out how to continue feeding their families and paying their rent. Not even to mention the fact that Black, Indigenous, and other racial minority people are disproportionately affected by coronavirus, both in terms of health and economic impact. Interestingly, a lot of people who are privileged enough to make art are making note of this inequality in their work. I don't have any data about this, but I have anecdotally noticed a lot more politically charged art being created lately. Songs that speak to the hopelessness of a money-driven society, street artists publicly critiquing government responses to coronavirus, YouTubers getting uncharacteristically explicit in their condemnation of capitalism, and artists generally making stuff that reflects how fed up they are. Artistic people are losing their family members, losing their jobs, losing their money, and losing their chill. So while creativity does require privilege, it's also being used to critique the social structures that construct privilege in the first place. Hopefully, even after this current crisis ends, we will continue noticing and commenting on these social structures in our daily lives and in our art. Maybe eventually a person's ability to be creative won't be so dependent on their material conditions, because we will live in a society where everyone's basic needs are taken care of, and anyone who wants to is free to focus on creativity and self-fulfillment. Until then, I'm going to echo the advice that so many people have been giving out lately. If you find yourself unable to create, either during the crisis or after it ends, please do not judge yourself for it. Creativity is a personal process that does require personal responsibility, but it's also highly dependent on your material conditions and broader social position. So instead of just putting more pressure on yourself to be creative, ask yourself which of your more basic needs you might have to address before you can put all of your focus into your creative projects. And then once you are in a position where you're able to create, don't forget about the people who still aren't. In fact, whether you are incredibly creative and prolific or unable to create right now due to your circumstances, or don't even have any interest in being creative in the first place, pay attention to the voices that are being represented and valued in artistic communities, and use your voice to call attention to and fix that imbalance. Let's try to create a world where creativity isn't a privilege anymore. That's all I have to say on this topic today. Thank you for watching. I have a big month-long project coming up in June where I'm hopefully going to be posting short videos every day. And then hopefully in July I'll be back with more of these longer, scripted, introspective, reflective videos. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye. I recorded this video about a week ago, before I had heard about George Floyd's murder. Now, while the police in Minneapolis attack protesters with tear gas and bullets, rather than bring a repeated and recorded murderer to justice, I just didn't want to upload this video about human needs and individuality and privilege without talking about the fact that Black people and Black bodies are treated as disposable in America. I brought up human needs a lot in this video, but below everything else in Maslow's hierarchy is the need to breathe. We've seen stories like this way too many times, where the police kill unarmed Black people, face no repercussions, and then continue to harm and suppress protesters. A lot of people, including the President of the United States, are talking now about how Black people should be protesting non-violently instead of rioting. But Even their favorite nonviolent protester, Martin Luther King Jr., said that a riot is the language of the unheard. And even he got assassinated for his nonviolent activism. The reality is, no matter who they are or what they do, Black people are seen as inherently dangerous and criminal. When they get angry about murder, they are seen as violent and may become the next victim. When they protest peacefully, they are seen as violent and may become the next victim. When they sit in a car or walk down the street in a hoodie or exist in their own homes or run away from the cops, they are seen as violent and may become the next victim. America is a police state that churns out Black corpses, and if you think that a damaged building is more shameful than a lost Black life, you are part of the problem. If you can, please donate to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which is bailing out protesters who get arrested, Black Visions Collective, which does work in transformative justice in Minneapolis, and North Star Health Collective, which is buying gear and medical supplies. If you can't donate, please sign the petitions linked below and call the Minneapolis representatives to demand that the officers involved are charged with murder. As I said before, use your voice to call attention to and fix imbalances in our society. Share information, but not graphic imagery or images of protesters on social media. Talk to your friends and family about their internalized biases. Participate in Black organized protests in your area, but don't travel to Minneapolis. I know that as white people, it can be difficult or uncomfortable to talk about race. You might not know when it is or isn't your place to speak, and you might be afraid to say the wrong thing, but I can tell you that right now, with so many lives lost and so many more lives on the line, this is definitely the time to speak up, and the worst thing you could possibly say is nothing. Black Lives Matter. Don't let anyone get away with thinking that they don't.